A beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 10,191.
Hi, I'm Johnny. This is Johnny Likes, the show where I talk about movies that I like. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the giants in the science fiction world. A divisive film adaptation based upon one of the most beloved and best-selling novels of all time. Today, Johnny likes Dune. Dune was written and directed by David Lynch, based on Frank Herbert's novel. I've always run into trouble when trying to do a plot synopsis for Dune, so I'm not actually going to bother here. If you don't know the story, there are plenty of YouTube videos covering it, or you could just Google it. For the most part, this is going to be an overview of stuff I like about the movie. There is some mild spoilers going on throughout, so proceed with caution. My personal history with the film goes something like this. I had never heard of Dune as either a book or a film when I was at a sleepover at my friend's house when I was around 11 years old. His older stepbrothers were watching the film in the other room, and we wandered over and checked it out for a little bit. I think we saw the scene where Paul is training against a fighter. It looked cool though, and I eventually did rent it for myself so I could watch the whole thing. And as a kid, I loved it. And I've watched it many, many times over the years, and I've continued to love it into adulthood. When I first saw the movie, it made me want to read the book, as I had heard that it was much, much better than the movie. I read the first book, second book, and possibly the third book over about the span of a year and a half, and I didn't finish Frank Herbert's part of the series until fairly recently, actually. For those who don't know, Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son, co-wrote a ton of extended universe and sequels for the Dune series. I'm not familiar with any of those. I might check them out in the future, as I really like the Dune universe. It's an intricate universe full of great action, tons of huge philosophical ideas, and I would highly recommend the novels, at least the Frank Herbert side of them. But I'm here to talk about the David Lynch movie, not so much the books, although I will compare here and there as I have the knowledge. Since 1984, there have been a few different adaptations of Dune. First, there was the Sci-Fi Channel's kind of mini-series that they did in the early 2000s. They did, I think, the first 3 books. Then there was the Denis Villeneuve adaptation a few years back, where he did the first part, and second part has yet to come out, but I'm pretty psyched for that. And those other versions are fine and good, but it's the Lynch version that has a special place in my heart. Now, which Lynch version am I talking about here, as there are multiple versions that have come out over the years? There's the original theatrical that most people are familiar with, and then there is the TV version, which is an extended near 3-hour cut, which Lynch insisted having his name taken off of, so if you ever see it, it's directed by Alan Smithee, which is the pseudonym that directors use when they take their name off a film. There's also a pretty good fan cut that's available called, I think it's the Alternative Edition Redux, which takes basically all the source material that they could find and tries to slam it into a decent movie that better represents the book. But to answer my own question, we're talking about the theatrical version here. The theatrical version is the best standalone movie, whereas the extended and alternative editions are closer to the novel, but they do suffer from some major pacing issues. Without this being a novel first, this movie would be looked upon as kind of this super weird 80s movie with excellent sets and characters designs and a messy plot, which all those things are true. If you're already a fan and have never seen the other versions, I would recommend checking out the Alternative Edition Redux. I believe it's available on YouTube, and it's worth a watch as it's an interesting look as to what could have been. Whatever else you think about this film, it is great to look at. The way that the sets, costumes, choreography, cinematography, various just film trickery are used together, it produces an effect that's greater than the sum of its parts. Each and every set looks epic here. It's not always in scale, although there are some sizable ones, but often just in the production design choices. I'm not sure how other Dunes fans feel about the look of the film, but I think it just looks fantastic. Everything seems so grand, and even smaller scale settings like, say, Paul's room on Caladan just seem larger than life. The film craft used to create some of the shots here, the blending of matte paintings and forced perspective and actual shots and possibly models, most probably models. It's just a mastery of filmmaking. There's an intricate nature of the shots in the film that continues to impress me. I often see some little background thing going on that I've never noticed before. Or I'll just be looking at like a staircase in one shot and notice that there's all these details in the background that I just never realized were there. The extras always have an interesting look to them. I wouldn't call them ugly, but they do have an indescribable look to them. The Spice Guild navigators in their hideous mutated form, in their chambers full of spice gas, look pretty wild. I never imagined them looking anything like this, but they're something. The look of the Baron Harkonnen was grotesque and repulsive, as the floating fat man covered in pus-filled boils. The still suits that the Fremen wore were pretty bang on as to what was described in the novel. The Bene Gesserit looked pretty cool too in their mostly black dresses with their weird head dresses. The sandworms were awe-inspiring and wonderfully executed as the kind of kraken of the desert. Again, pretty much exactly as described in the books. If you haven't seen the film, they look kind of like the Sarlacc pit in Return of the Jedi, or the sandworms that you see in Beetlejuice. And you can kind of see exactly where those films got their inspiration from here. Giddy Prime looks fantastic and inspired as well as the industrial hellscape homeworld of the Harkonnens. Almost every aspect of the film seems to have thoughtful intentions behind it. I felt like the sets and architecture had meaning behind it that I'm not fully grasping. It's like every aspect had depth to it. Take that shot I just described with the staircase and the cool architecture. Now that's on Caladan. And Caladan is much like Earth. It's mostly covered in water. So the sea is a important part of their culture. And the staircase kind of reminds me of seashells. So is the importance of the sea represented in their architecture? Is that a bit of a stretch? Maybe. But just the fact that I'm even considering it just shows the level of the craft of the filmmaking that is on display here. And that kind of filmmaking is pretty exciting. Not everything looked great here. There were some misses. The fight that Paul and Gurney have with those shields, that's clunky and very dated CGI. Although I will say that at the time it would have been spectacular because there wouldn't have been anything that really looked like that before. But now it looks bad. Although considering the state of like computers at the time, not so bad maybe. Maybe understandable is a better word. The Sardaukar with their kind of biohazard looking suits, that didn't really work for me, never has. Sting's little briefs that he wears, that's a strong choice. I don't think it really works. I've seen that scene in the movie so many times that I just kind of accepted that's how he looks. Whatever, that's just how fate goes. The shots of the spaceships sometimes were cut and paste looking, literally, like they were not dimensioned, they were not model shot. It just looked like a piece of paper appeared on another piece of paper. So that was pretty rough, and I'm not sure why they did that, because much of the film you can tell there is models, there's miniatures used. And well, I don't know why they wouldn't have went that route for the space stuff. Maybe they ran out of time, maybe they ran out of money. That's all I can do is speculate. Because I know they must have been like, eugh. The acting in this film is an interesting mix of styles. First, you have the mostly British actors, who seem like they come from a theater background. And I stress seem, as I don't know if they actually do. It felt like they were on stage performing for an audience for much of the time. Patrick Stewart, Kenneth McMillan, Jose Ferrer, Paul L. Smith, and Freddie Jones all fall into this category. I'm not even sure if those guys are all British, but they all fall under the same style of acting. That's kind of what I'm saying here. Second, you have the oddball character actors. Everett McGill, Brad Dourif, Leonardo Cimino, and Linda Hunt. I would say they all fall into that category. Third, you've got a mix of international actors. Jurgen Prochnow, Francessca and Sian Phillips. And fourth, you've got the inexperienced newbie talent, such as MacLachlan and Virginia Madsen, Sting and Sean Young. Everyone here is bringing their A game, don't get me wrong. It's just they don't all seem to be playing quite the same game. When you filter all the different styles through David Lynch's sensibilities, it makes for a unique experience. I never had any real problems with the performances. I did think that casting MacLachlan was maybe a bit of a stretch to be playing a 15-year-old, as he is 25 or 26 here, and you don't believe for a second that he's 15. Speaking of MacLachlan, I can't imagine the amount of pressure he must have felt while filming this, as this was his first film role, and he's the star of the movie, and so much of its success depends on him able to give a convincing performance. Yeah, that's got to weigh on you. And all things considered, yeah, it's pretty good. I enjoyed it. He's a good actor. The soundtrack is fantastic, with the score being done by Toto. It's rousing and epic feeling. The theme that plays over the credits, it sucks me in every time, gets my blood going. And the kind of zooming in sound that plays in the cold open with Princess Irulan when she's giving us the exposition dump. It reminds me of the THX sound. I have a Pavlovian response to it where I just focus right in. Just having the guilds people talking into the microphones, and you can hear their own language overlapped with the sound of the translated stuff. I love that effect. It sounds so cool.
Emperor Shaddam IV, you have one last chance to take matters into your own hands and bring the situation under control on Arrakis.
Speaking of overlapping voices, the sound of the voice that the Bene Gesserit use, it was pretty badass as well. When I read the books, that's the noise that I heard in my head. I'm very curious as to what people who had read the books first, what they thought the voice sounded like as compared to that, because this was planted in my brain first. Yeah, I like the voice. So let's talk the books just a little bit. Mostly just stuff that's taken out or changed a little bit. Some elements did get removed or truncated from the novels. The most prominent one that I kind of missed was actually the emphasis on the political intrigue, the palace drama, I guess. All the different factions plotting against each other. It was a much larger aspect of the novel than it is the film. And I can understand why they cut most of that from the film, as in the extended edition, it's what makes it seem long and boring. Whereas in the novel, it was actually quite exciting, which is unusual for me to say. I'm not a huge fan of that aspect, but it worked very well in Dune for me for whatever reason. Perhaps it was that they are always using an omniscient point of view. That means that you pop from character to character and you know exactly what they're thinking. You hear their inner monologue aloud. And I did like how they tried to kind of keep that in the film by giving voiceovers to the characters. The science aspect of the film, the weirding modules that the Atreides use that manipulate sound into a weapon, that's a super cool idea, and that is actually original to the film. That was not present in the books, so that's something that they pulled out of I don't know where, but that was pretty cool. The technology in the Dune universe is explained just right. We never get nitty-gritty specifics, just the basics of how a thing works. Like, we know that they can fold time and travel without moving, and that they use the spice to do this somehow, but they don't explain the mechanics of it, which is a thing that can bog down a lot of science fiction, is explaining how this cool gadget would work. One of the things I love about science fiction is its ability to portray big themes and ideas. They can really extrapolate and play things out to their logical conclusions. And this film is full of those. The self-fulfilling prophecy is a pretty big idea here, pretty front and center. So a set of outcomes are foretold, and someone is aware of these outcomes, and they make them come true. Now, does that make the prophecy any less true? That's pretty much what happens with Paul here. He's aware of the prophecy concerning him, as the Bene Gesserit actually use this as a kind of seed when they visit a new world. It's a way that they use to control the population relatively quickly and easily. And that wasn't super clear in the film, but it was more so in the books. And this relates to stuff like, what is fate? Can one's own fate be changed? If Paul didn't know about the prophecy, would that have made it not happen? All that sort of stuff. All these big philosophical questions, they're just sprinkled throughout. And you're not really hammered over the head with them too much, but they are definitely present. It's this philosophical long-term thinking that is present in the film that helps to set it a cut above other standard space opera fare. And it keeps me thinking about the film and coming back to it and examining these perhaps unanswerable questions. This film is filled with tons of memorable, quotable lines, and several of them have made it into popular culture to varying degrees, I'd say. The probably most popular ones are the Litany of Fear.
Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. I must not
feel flesh.
And Walk Without Rhythm, and You Won't Attract the Worm.
Remember, walk without rhythm, and we won't attract the worm.
Fatboy Slim sampled that for his song Weapon of Choice, which is famous as that video that has Christopher Walken dancing around a hotel. Yeah, check that out if you've never seen it. But here's a bunch of the lines from the film that I love.
I know, Thufir, I'm sitting with my back to the door. I heard you, Dr. Yui, and Gurney coming down the hall.
Those sounds could be imitated.
I'd know the difference.
It is by will alone I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of Safu that thoughts acquire speed, the lips acquire stains, the stains become a warning. It is by will alone I set my mind in motion.
He who controls the spice controls the universe.
Father, the sleeper has awakened!
Yell at it.
Put your right hand in the box.
What's in the box?
Pain.
You've worn a still suit before.
No.
Your suit is fitted desert fashion. Who told you how to do that?
No one. It seemed the proper way.
You get the idea, right? There's lots of memorable scenes in the movie too. Paul training with the fighter. In the beginning. The whole box test, like, that's great. The worm eating the Spice Rover scene. The Hunter-Seeker assassination attempt on Paul. Paul using the voice in the Omnithopter.
Don't touch my mother.
He's trying the voice.
Paul showing the Fremen how to use the weirding module. Paul and Fade's fight.
Paul!
Paul conquering the worm. Just to name a few. Like, there's more. There is some pretty wild stuff that slips its way into this film. I mentioned the guild navigators earlier, and them having a pretty cool look. Well, their mouths, they're pretty striking, and I kind of feel like I might have to censor them for YouTube. Most of the stuff involving the Baron is freak show stuff as well. The heart plugs, the drinking the freshly squeezed rat creature juice. The servant that Baron kills for fun. Thufir having to milk a cat with a mouse strapped to its side for an antidote. Baron being treated for his pus-filled boils by the creepy doctor. This is not quite your standard Hollywood fare. This is much darker and weirder than you'd normally see in a big epic like this. And I think that this is one of the reasons that the film has actually had some staying power, is just the oddness of all of it. It made an impression on me, that's for sure. Last thing I'm going to talk about is the production of the movie. It's fairly widely known that this was like production hell 101. So Lynch signed on to do a 2-part movie, I believe, or that's the story as I know it. And then like a third of the way into production or of filming, the producers decided to cut it down to just one movie, and Lynch still had to make it work without, having to further condense a sprawling tale such as Dune into like a 2 and change hour movie when he'd previously probably had like 4 or 5 hours planned. Like, imagine if the Lord of the Rings trilogy had been turned into a 2.5 hour film and they decided to do it a third of the way into production. It would have been a little bit different, right? And ever since then, Lynch has always had final cut of his films. He didn't really care for how this one turned out, and I'm sure it was an awful experience for him. But with all those constraints and pressures put upon him, this movie should have been a lot worse than it actually is. Even if you don't really like it, you gotta give props where props are due. And I understand some people's dislike for this version. If I had been a Dune fan and I was awaiting this movie, and then this is what they gave me, I might still be salty about it. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Because I saw this first and I was just a kid, I think it's fine. But I can understand why people wouldn't like it. There are some pacing issues. If you were familiar with the source material, not everything would be as you pictured it. At times drastically. Luckily, I didn't have any of those expectations going into this. I was just a kid who liked sci-fi, and now I'm a big kid who just likes this weird sci-fi movie. As much as I love this film, it's not perfect, and it's always been just a little bit frustrating for me because it had this potential to be so much more. Like, I like the style and aesthetic of the film, and if they would have been able to do what was originally planned, it'd be a different world anyways. But there's still a lot to love here, and I could see people not liking some of the performances, or finding it slow, or not liking the special effects, finding Lynch too weird. There's any number of things, but I just don't share those opinions. My biggest issues with the film are the ending with the rain, didn't care for that, and some of the pacing. Like, it does drag just a little bit. It is just a little bit slow at times. But these points don't really make me enjoy it all that much less. I'm going to rate this a 4.5 out of 5. The costumes and sets are amazing. The special effects are mostly amazing. The action scenes are rousing. The score, it's banging, I guess. It slaps. Can I say that? Am I way too old to say that? The score slaps. And the cast is wonderful. Overall, it's just a classic that anyone who likes science fiction should watch. Even if the film doesn't grab you, I'm sure you'll find something worthwhile in the watch. Recommendations. Check out all the Dune stuff. Watch the 2000 miniseries, watch the 2019 Dune, watch the fan cut of this movie. So do you guys love this or hate this, or are you kind of indifferent to it? What's your feelings on it? Are the non-Frank Herbert novels worth my time? And what's a novel adaptation that you think got done poorly, that was done dirty? Or you can answer it in the comments and talk amongst yourselves. If you could do me a favor and like and subscribe, that would be super duper. It's quick, free, and relatively painless. Plus, it really helps me out. Thanks for watching me talk about movies for a while, and you can tune in next time to see what else Johnny likes.
The second moon. The sleeper must awaken.